Okay, you're listening to KOWS 107.3 FM in Occidental, California. It's October 31st, 2011, and on the telephone we have Professor Stephen R. Kellert. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let me get oriented here. I'm running a minute or two late. You are on the East Coast, aren't you?
Correct. New Haven, Connecticut.
New Haven, Connecticut. And you are, let me see, let me grab my, you are the Tweedy, you probably know this already, you're the Tweedy Ordway Professor Emeritus and Senior Research Scholar at Yale University, the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, correct?
That's correct.
And you're also board director of the Biological Capital Organization, Pioneers of Stewardship Development, also correct?
That is correct.
All right, we're off to a good start. Dr. Stephen R. Kellert, Ph.D., Yale University, and many, many awards, a long distinguished career, Distinguished Alumni Service Award. It goes on, and the author of a number of books. You've been described as a rather prolific writer and a master teacher. And your work focuses on understanding the connection between human and natural systems, with a particular interest in the value and conservation of nature and designing ways to harmonize the natural and human-built environments. So thank you so much for joining us and coming to talk to us about the work that you do and your understanding.
My pleasure.
How can we flesh out your introduction so that we have a full understanding of what you bring to us?
You would like me to do that?
Yes, sir.
Well,
if you will.
As that brief description indicates, I'm particularly interested in the relationship between people in the natural environment and particularly how our evolutionary development in the context of the natural world has created an inherent affinity for nature that remains, in my estimation, and some of the increasing evidence supports, important to our physical and mental health and productivity and well-being. And I'm particularly concerned and challenged by how we maintain a positive and beneficial relationship to the natural world in the modern context in which we live, which is increasingly a built and constructed world, and ever more in an urban context. And I guess that's enough for now.
Mm-hmm. What is meant by the built environment or the built world?
Well, it's just kind of a funny way of saying, the buildings and constructions. We spend, maybe a better way to describe it is just to kind of describe where we spend most of our time, which now on average is about 90% indoors, and even though we, as I suggested before, over 99% of our history as a species was in a natural world where we developed our physical and emotional and intellectual characteristics. Nonetheless, the world that we live in right now, the natural habitat, so to speak, of modern humans has become the indoor built environment, which is a place that we have basically constructed and created. That doesn't eliminate the need we have for contact with nature that remains important and instrumental in our health and well-being, but it makes the challenge of maintaining a positive and beneficial relationship to nature that much more difficult because we live ever more insulated and isolated from nature.
Mm-hmm. I just want to further inform our listeners that Dr. Kellert has served on committees of the National Academy of Sciences and is the author of books such as Kinship to Mastery, Biophilic Design. You co-authored a book with E.O. Wilson. Would that be the biophilic hypothesis, perhaps?
Biophilia hypothesis.
Biophilia hypothesis. And you have a new book. I don't know if it's published yet. It's called Birthright of a True Humanity, People and Nature in the Modern World. So
it hasn't been published yet, but I hope it will be published.
Well, I think it will be. And the book that I was able to wrestle from the library, Building for Life, Designing and Understanding the Human-Nature Connection. So this is I guess it's a field, and it's a field that is increasingly hitting the radar screens of our environmental consciousness, and more than that, the understanding that this is not just making pretty buildings or even necessarily environmentally friendly buildings, but that this speaks to a most profound and fundamental human need that maybe heretofore has been inadequately recognized. Was that accurate?
That's very accurate. Actually, that was a very perceptive in many respects. There is a tendency. I mean, you referred to it's not just making pretty buildings or making environmentally friendly buildings, and I think that was right on the mark. I mean, there is a tendency among people to think that nature is an amenity value. It's nice, but not necessary. It's fine when you have the time. You'll go experience nature, and it usually it's problematic for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, it kind of trivializes the relationship, and it kind of creates the impression that nature is something out there, and where we are is somewhere different. That somehow we're not nature, and as I say, it kind of suggests that it's nice but not necessary. It may be pretty to look at and pleasant, and provide some form of recreational enjoyment when you have the time and pleasure, or you have the means. But it's not really serious. It's not the important stuff of getting on with life and being successful and happy and fulfilled. And especially if you're, let's say, poor or impoverished, it's a luxury that is not to be that's secondary, and that's very problematic. I mean, the whole point of biophilia is that we have this inherent need to affiliate with nature. It has many different ways in which it manifests itself and expresses itself. I won't go into that quite yet, and that. It's not a vestigial need that evolved when we were, primarily hunter and gatherers. That it continues to be essential to our capacity to think critically, to solve problems, to develop in a healthy and productive way, to be imaginative and creative, and in many respects that are keys to a fit and successful and fulfilling life, and that if we are separated or alienated or estranged from that relationship, we do so at our peril. That it'll impoverish us in many respects. In terms of our health and our productivity and our well-being, and physically, mentally, and even spiritually. The other point you made about it's not just environmentally friendly. That's a little bit. The term environmentally friendly is a little bit confusing, because people think of environmentally friendly buildings as ones that have a minimal harmful impact on the natural environment, and it's all about what we do to the environment. I guess in that sense, it's environmentally friendly. The notion of biophilia and biophilic design, in a sense, turns that whole notion on its head and says, what does the environment do for us? And I guess we're talking about human friendly, if you will. It's the opposite of save the whales, it's kind of save the humans. And to the extent that we don't have buildings where we spend, as I mentioned, has become our, the habitat in which we spend most of our time, that don't nurture and enhance and enrich our physical and mental selves, we're not going to be healthy and productive in those habitats. And it's really about creating good habitat for people. And an essential aspect of that is maintaining this positive and reinforcing and enriching relationship to nature in the built environment. And that doesn't just mean bringing nature indoors, like having an indoor plant or something like that, or bringing people outdoors. It's often in very indirect and subtle ways. It has to do with materials. It has to do with shapes and forms, and all our great buildings, if you look at them, the ones that we revere and sustain generation after generation, not just buildings but communities and landscapes, are very often ones, cultural landscapes I'm referring to, are often ones where the experience of nature is a very much a part of that in terms of shapes and forms and materials and natural lighting and all kinds of ways in which the experience of nature is brought indoors, not necessarily in a direct way, like, as I said, contact with a plant. That's good to have, indoor plants, but it's much more subtle and diverse than that, and it draws upon principles that you find in nature that we evolved in relationship to and have an affinity for. And as I say, many of our great buildings have these characteristics. And I've talked for too long, but I was trying to respond to those two important points you made about it's not just pretty and environmentally friendly.
Well, you didn't talk a moment too long. I was just thinking another way, and looking at it from another angle, is that we're beginning to to perceive more critically that we're talking about a potentially catastrophic disconnect.
Oh, absolutely. And if this is, I'll give a few illustrations of that, which I think is very important. Point. If this is an inherent inclination, which the whole notion of biophilia is that it is, and that it's a need and a dependence that needs to be addressed. And I should say this tendency, like much of what makes us human, it needs to be nurtured, needs to be developed, needs experience and learning to become robust and fully adaptive. And that's the sort of the distinctiveness of the human animal, is that we, that even though we're a biological animal and we're talking about our biology here, much of our biology is very susceptible to learning and experience to become fully developed, and it gives us tremendous creative powers, and it gives us extraordinary ability for distinctiveness, both as individuals and groups and cultures. But it's a creativity and a distinctiveness that's bound by biology. If you go outside those bounds, you run into dysfunction. I'm digressing for a moment, but the point is that these biophilic tendencies, if you will, these biophilic values, need to be nurtured and developed to really become adaptive and functional. And like anything that is inherent, the most important period for that socialization is going to be during childhood. Mm-hmm. And part of the, getting back to your point about the disconnect, one of the most profound illustrations of that disconnect is the world in which children are increasingly growing up in. The average child today spends in a typical week less than 40 minutes outside. Oh. And just a generation ago, it was more than 4 hours outside. But even more, kind of disconcerting, if you will, is the fact that the average child today spends 52 hours a week engaged in electronic media, and just 5 years ago when they did a previous study, it was 46 hours a week. So they're spending 52 hours, which is an extraordinary amount of time with computers or television or games, and less than 40 minutes outside. Now, as I said before, we experience nature in many ways, and it's not just outdoors, but still, the disproportion associated with those statistics alone suggest a profound disconnect and an experiment that we're perpetrating on ourselves with, I think, the potential for disastrous consequences in terms of our development, and especially childhood development. And but it's not just children. I don't want to kind of suggest that this is just a problem of children. I mean, we spend, as I said, this is not an attack against the built environment or against the city, but the city is the most transformed of all environments in which we live. 80% of us now live in an urban environment. We spend 90% of our time indoors, and the typical or traditional paradigm of development of the urban built environment has been one of massive transformation of the natural world. It's degradation, suppression, and increasing separation, if not alienation, of people from nature. Now, I'm of a view that cities can be extraordinarily satisfying and beneficial places from a perspective of connection to nature. But again, as I said before, the challenge of making that happen is that much greater, just because of the way in which we've gone about designing and developing our cities, in recent times. It can, a city can be a rich and bountiful garden in which people experience nature in very positive and enriching ways. But it's as I say, it's a much greater challenge than obviously if you're in a less developed area. But as I said before, that disconnect, runs across the board, and we're finding that. The average office worker, another example of the disconnect, and these are just anecdotes, but I think they tell a lot, is that the average office worker in the United States right now, I think it's about 60% of office workers in the United States right now, work in a windowless environment, and these are. There's a woman in the Pacific Northwest, Judith Hirwagen, has done a lot of great work in this area, and she made the point that we no longer allow animals in modern zoos to live in barren, sensory deprived environments. We put them into naturalistic environments, and we do so, and we find that they behave in a far more, physically and mentally healthy way when they go into those naturalistic environments and those sensory rich and stimulating environments. And we ban those old cage zoos as inhumane, but somehow it's humane to put a human in kind of the equivalent of the old barren cage, zoos in these windowless offices with no sensory stimulation and a barren, numbing environment, and we expect people to be productive in those settings. And when they're not, they get they get tired more easily. They develop all kinds of symptomatology. They have fatigue. They're not particularly motivated. And so just for self-interest alone, it would make sense to change those windowless environments, because the few experiments that we have, or a few studies that we have, show that when you enrich those environments, you give people views or natural lighting, or you fill them with, plants, that people are more attentive, their morale goes up, they're more motivated, there's less absenteeism, there's higher retention. So anyway, just another example of the disconnect that you refer to is, the fact that we think we can just put people like machines into these windowless environments, give them some processed air and lighting, artificial lighting, and tell them to go at it and be productive.
Right, and the flaw here is that we're actually not machines; we're biological beings.
That is absolutely on point. That's the key right there. I mean, unfortunately, we got into this mentality that's deeply rooted in our culture that thinks that progress in civilization is somehow transforming nature and our kind of transcending nature and becoming something, that is not dependent on the natural world, and whether it's medicine or modern technology or the built environment, that the measure of progress in civilization is how far removed we are from nature and how much we've transcended it, and that the ultimate, kind of successes are becoming this kind of godlike being that no longer is biological at all, somehow is, has the gift of immortality or whatever.
Yeah. I'm reminded of Thomas Berry's remark that we have become autistic.
Well, it's a very interesting term. Richard Louv referred to, who wrote that great book about children's disconnect from nature, and he called it nature deficit disorder, and autistic is another, kind of clinical term. A great writer, Bob Pyle, actually he's a lepidopterist, a person who studies butterflies, but anyway, he wrote about this problem as well, and he called it the extinction of experience. And all these terms like autistic and nature deficit disorder and extinction of experience are a bit strong. They're probably overstate the issue, but they have an important core of truth in that they allude to this, disconnect or this, this impoverished relationship between people and nature that's become so prevalent in our society, and with the consequence being like, and when you talk about autistic, it's kind of an emotional and intellectual, kind of disturbance, if you will, and Richard Nelson, a great anthropologist, called it an imperiling loneliness, which I think is a good way to describe it as well. I think that if we fundamentally impoverish our connection to nature, there will one of the subtle but profound consequences will be this impoverished spirit, this imperiled sense of self and feeling of meaningful connection to the world beyond ourselves and purposefulness, and if people are lonely and depressed, sad, they turn on themselves, and I think that's every bit as much a threat as the more obvious things that we worry about, like disease and war. In fact, you could say there's a relationship between all these things. The spirit and the emotions are very much connected to our behavior and the actions that we take. Anyway, that's getting a bit deep and philosophical.
Well, that's what we like on this show, so we'll plunge ahead. I'm thinking psychologically that perhaps we're carrying a load of guilt and shame that we're unwilling to face, and that we're kind of acting out maybe a clinical masochism, or I think you used the term self-punitive element in too many of our behaviors and even institutional behaviors. But that's just another way of looking at it, just another speculation. You spoke of nurturing and developing the biophilic reality. How do we? I mean, you're dealing with architecture and the built environment, but I'm also particularly interested in childhood development, and wondering what your thoughts on are on nurturing, our native biological realities in childhood.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where it all starts, and certainly, there's a world of opportunity and possibilities out there, and, I don't think there's any, prescriptive, definitive checklist that and people will what they can do and will vary depending upon their circumstances, where they live, and their socioeconomic status and their cultural relationships, but within all that variation, there's just a world of possibilities. I mean, certainly getting kids outdoors is part of it. But as I said before, it's not just outdoors. Kids historically have. I mean, when you look at most children's books and the great classics, and they're all about nature and the characters and the stories and the animals that are in them, and they're fantastic, but they're all about teaching kids lessons about all sorts of basic issues of relationship and longing and striving and getting along with others, and which are people relationships, but they often use nature and animals in particular as a way to facilitate that that learning and that experience. And so children's books and coloring books. I mean, there's just 100 different ways. Even television shows and computers. I mean, I think before, if my suggestion about 52 hours engaged in electronic media, of which a lot of it is computers and television, suggests that I'm anti-computer and television. That's not the case. I mean, anybody who is going to be, kind of flailing in the wind, because that's the world that we live in, and kids, are not going to give up their computers and not going to give up their television sets. But there are all kinds of ways in which, these marvelous technological inventions can be used to facilitate a relationship. Now, it's not enough. I mean, the problem is that it doesn't have the challenge and the coping and the diversity and the information richness of the experience outdoors, especially free play experience outdoors. I mean, that's part of it as well, is giving your kids not only the opportunity to be outside more, but letting them be outside on their own, and have that free play opportunity, which will often involve experiences that are not all, copacetic and friendly. I mean, that's one of the problems of the indoor experience, is that there's no real, or there's very little challenge or coping or fear or anxiety, adversity to be addressed, and that's part of the learning experience. And so kids, outdoors will create a world of wonder. I mean, we all can remember those times in childhood where we, in very simple habitats. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. You don't have to take your kids to Yellowstone National Park or even, the local state park. I mean, a good backyard or even a local park, even an abandoned lot can be a place where kids can do, can create an incredibly satisfying and enriching world. So outdoors is part of it, and then part of it is also controlled nature and facilitating opportunities and experiences of kids with that. And by controlled nature, I mean things like going to a botanical garden or a zoo or a nature center or a park where obviously nature wouldn't exist if it wasn't for constant human input, manipulation, and control, which isn't bad. It's not, it's not the kind of spontaneous free play experience of nature that I was talking about before. But it's still it can be a very satisfying, enriching, and beneficial one. And so all those relationships and all the habitats that children live in. I mean, children spend most of their time at home, at school and at play, and we have to think about all those environments, including the school environment. Schools, modern schools have to a disproportionate degree have defined learning as formal, indoor, abstract learning, and with very little experiential opportunities, and even fewer in relationship to nature. And that's just, it's just an unfortunate blinder that became part of our educational establishment. And I'm not saying that indoor abstract formal learning is bad. It's very important for certain kinds of very challenging sorts of learning. But it needs to be balanced by more opportunities for experiential learning, for outdoor experience, for bringing the outdoors indoors. I mean, in all sorts of ways, and so the school environment needs to be part of this. Consideration as well. What happens at home, and what happens at school, and what happens at play. And right now, kids at school, I think are overburdened by this formal abstract learning. At home, they're too much engaged in activities that have very little contact with nature, and even at play, their time is too structured, too organized, too controlled, and too artificial. And so, I'm not saying organized sports are bad. That's an important part of American life. But again, it's a question of balance rather than one or the other.
Well, there's been a movement to do away with recess because it's unproductive.
Right.
I mean, how that's
do away with summer because why waste all that time?
Really, that's right.
Be learning.
That's right. Very suspicious. Very. It strikes me as fairly psychotic, actually. Tell us, if you will, about biological capital, the work you do there.
Well, biological capital is, as an academic, you kind of you study, you analyze, you research, you write, you pontificate, and it's a marvelous opportunity to stand back and look at the world in an analytical way and try to understand it, and then try to communicate that understanding and try to do interventions and studies that are systematic and empirical and controlled, and that enhance that understanding. And that's all very well and good, but it's kind of you're not out there in the trenches, so to speak, and so I've always been at kind of at that edge as a person in a professional school between the world of practice and application and the world of theory and science, but still at a university, you're more in the theory and science part and less on the application and practice. And so as the years went by, I became more and more interested in the opportunity to, put some of this theory to practice, if you will, and I had a chance to do so first with a private equity group called Environmental Capital Partners, and for all sorts of reasons, I found private equity. It was interesting, not suitably sufficient for what I wanted to get engaged in, and I had this opportunity with this company called Biological Capital, which is based in Denver, that tries to do what we call multi-layered sustainable land uses on large landscapes, where we do everything from renewable energy to sustainable agriculture, sustainable forestry, ecologically oriented real estate development, if you will, water projects, or environmentally sustainable recreation. And a problem with any single sustainable land use when it competes against a conventional land use is that it almost always comes out on the wrong end from the point of view of our economic system, because by virtue of being sustainable, it's trying to do it within the ecological and social carrying capacity of a particular piece of land. It's not doing it at a maximum production level, not discounting the future and not worrying really about it and trying to extract as much as possible. So in almost all cases, except for some exceptional ones, it's going to be at a competitive disadvantage. And also, if you rely on a single land use, you're always subject to the change of both economic and environmental. Mm-hmm. And so, which again, an industrial scale land use doesn't usually worry about. They try to maximize profits, and then if something changes, they reinvest those profits somewhere else. But so if you have multiple sustainable land uses, and that's this multi-layered approach that biological capital takes. In other words, you have many different activities on the land, and you have the advantage of both cumulatively, in theory, competitively competing with a single industrial scale land use, as well as the more ecologically appropriate capacity to adapt to changing circumstances, both environmental and economic. But the challenge to do that kind of multi-layered sustainable land use approach is you have to have very large landscapes to do it, because if you have a small parcel of land and you try to do too many things on it, it's just not going to work out. And it has to be over a long period of time in order to be able to implement it in a way that's sustainable from a temporal perspective, as well as in an appropriate staged way. So to have large parcels of land and hold on to them for very long periods of time, and to implement this multi-layered approach is difficult to accomplish. But that's what we're trying to do, mm-hmm. And we believe it's it's an approach to addressing all these things that we get from the land, which are critical and essential to our well-being, whether it be food or fodder or shelter, water, recreation, etc., but trying to do it in a way that is both sustainable and can doesn't have to be subsidized, can compete
right
economically with the conventional approach.
Right. This strikes me. This is a direct. I guess you could say a built environment analog to monocultural versus polycultural agriculture.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite persons is Wes Jackson, who's talked a lot about, polycultural perennial agriculture, and which is a great dream and a very difficult thing to accomplish, and he's made great progress, but he'll be, I think, the first to admit it takes time to implement this type of change. And
he said it's going to take him 40, 50 years.
Yeah, and ecologically, that's not a very long period of time. No. In human terms, that's a long period of time. Mm-hmm. But, I think it was Ada Leopold who said that one of the great, greatest challenges that humans have ever had is to live on a piece of land and not ruin it. And we haven't been very, very good at that. And we've been at it for quite a long period of time. So 40, 50 years, if he gets his agricultural part right, and we can benefit from it and implement it as part of our multi-layered approach, that would be just great. And already I think you can. It's harder with crop agriculture than it is with livestock agriculture, and I think the kind of thing that Wes is aspiring to do with crops has to some extent been accomplished with livestock, with using multiple foraging regimes, right, and moving them around a lot, and mimicking their behavior in a more natural state.
Right. Are you familiar with Alan Savory?
Yeah, I am. I wouldn't say I'm anywhere an expert on his work, but I've been familiar with his work for quite a long time.
Yeah, they awarded him the Buckminster Fuller Award, I think, last year.
Oh, no kidding!
And he's bringing people to Africa to demonstrate, the wisdom of his lifelong work.
I know, that's great.
Yeah.
He kind of good for him. He like lots of people have labored in the weeds for a long time, so it's great to see that kind of recognition.
And taken a lot of abuse for it.
Yep.
We've had Wes Jackson and Alan Savory and Fred Kirshenman on the show, and they are our philosopher farmers, and they're probably showing us some of the most essential understandings of the direction that we need to go in of any people I can think of. Professor Kellert, you submitted a short essay to this wonderful book called Moral Ground, and your essay was entitled "For the Love and Beauty of Nature." And we covered this already. I just want to do it one more time. You said that most of us view progress in civilization by how much we have seemingly transcended the constraints of our biology. And this is again, this seems to me to be the very crux of the matter. That this is an illusion that we've been indulging in. A fantasy, and you spoke about it. I'm asking you to speak about it just a little bit more.
Well, I wrote that article. It was kind of that chapter. It was kind of a grumpy chapter in some ways, but I was kind of frustrated because Aldo Leopold is one of our great heroes in the environmental field, and he had this incredible capacity to articulate the importance of nature in our lives, and like Edward Wilson, and informed by ecology and an understanding of human biology and non-human biology, and one of the I was participating in a celebration at Yale at the time. Aldo Leopold went to Yale as an undergraduate, and then he went to the Yale Forest School, as it was called then. Yale Forestry School started in 1900, and I think he graduated in 1909 or sometime around then. And and so we were celebrating his 100th anniversary since he graduated. And the meeting was an interesting meeting because one speaker after another talked about, issues of commodification of ecosystem services and, climate mitigation and new regulatory policies and better cost-benefit analysis and, new technologies for, sustainable development and energy efficiency. And all these things are fundamentally important, but they're all kind of approaching solving our problems with in a fairly mechanistic way, either through regulatory brute force, if you will, or through some kind of new technology and or new economic analysis or scientific data, and they never talked about, even though everyone always quotes Leopold's land ethic, and he talks about, love, faith, and a sense of obligation and feeling of deep reverent connection to nature as essential to any kind of progress that we're going to make toward living in some sort of sustainable, harmonious relationship to the natural world. And it was just nobody, and the beauty of nature he talks about as well in this marvelous quote about love and beauty, and so that's why I wrote the essay about For the Love and Beauty of Nature, because aesthetics and affection, and love is a form of affection, are every bit as much of our inherent inclination to affiliate with nature as material utilization or intellectual development or a sense of dominion or mastery control over nature. And there's a good reason why every human being, so far as we know, has an aesthetic response to nature. You can take the most terrible person, some psychopathic killer, and expose them to a beautiful sunset. And while they may not have as impressive as a response as you and I and other people, nonetheless, they're practically involuntary in their response to that beautiful sunset or beautiful rainbow or beautiful flowers. And aesthetics has been an extraordinary part of our response to nature. It's about curiosity, it's about creativity, it's about imagination, it's about seeing a model, an ideal to emulate and to learn from, and it's about identifying opportunities for sustenance and security. Color has been an important part of finding food and water and shelter and the same thing with affection. I mean, we're a deeply social animal. We like to think of ourselves as individualists, but we're really a very social animal, much more herd-like than we are, tiger-like. And affection, and we spend, and humans are born helpless and have a period of dependency that's twice that of our next closest, living relative, primate. And so affection and attachment and bonding are extraordinarily important in our development. And of course, a lot of this, aesthetic ability and or capacity and capacity for affection develops out of our relationships with other people, but it also develops in a very important, subtle, and essential ways in our relationship to the world beyond ourselves, to nature and to other non-human animals, and so love and beauty are just as important as these other ways in which we attach value and derive benefit from nature. And I was just, to get back to where I started, I was frustrated that nobody was talking about love and beauty as much as part of the Leopold legacy as these other considerations. And I even used an example from the built environment, because we had just finished a new building for the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, which we strove to have to be a biophilic building as much as, kind of a low environmental impact building. It wasn't just about energy efficiency or minimizing our harmful impact on the environment. We brought lots of natural materials and shapes and forms into the building. We created all sorts of transitional connections between the indoors and outdoors. And there was this great vaulted ceiling and the top floor. And it's really a beautiful structure. And and I asked the people, who were there, I said, how do you feel about it? It was a dark, stormy day and a terrible day, not a very good day to show off the building. But yet it was extraordinary, because you really felt the inside, connected to the inside, outside, even though you were sheltered and secure inside. And both in the materials and the shapes and forms of the inside environment, but also its visual connection to the outdoors. And I asked people how they liked the setting, and they said they loved it. And I asked them how they felt Leopold would have liked to study there, and they said they thought he would have loved it. And I said, well, when the energy efficient, solar collectors that we have are no longer particularly cutting edge technology, and when all the recycled materials that we used and so forth are no longer particularly are kind of worn out or need to be replaced, do you think people will have a sense of attachment to this building that would motivate them to want to restore it and renew it? And they all agreed that it would be. And I said, well, it's all about love and beauty. And even in an inanimate space such as a building, and that's what biophilic design is all about, is bringing that experience of nature into it and making love and beauty affection and attachment every bit as much a part of the experience of nature as, not consuming too much water and other kinds of resources, being as energy efficient as possible, reducing the climate emitting emissions to a minimum, recycling materials. All that's very important, but that in itself, if it's in a space that you don't have any kind of affinity or affection for, or you don't regard as beautiful, I guarantee you, again, when the technology is obsolete, people are not going to be motivated to renew that space. They're just going to move on to a new one. And if you always are building new to be sustainable, you can never quite get there.
Yeah, I can think of a number of buildings. I was fortunate to grow up in Manhattan. No shortage of magnificent built environment there. And I can think of a handful of buildings that are as close to my heart as, frankly, any people are.
Sure, and when you look closely at them, like Grand Central Station, you see it's. We just finished a film called The Biophilic Design, The Architecture of Life, which, because a lot of this is more easily seen than talked about in some respects. And we had a great series of scenes in Grand Central Station, space that people just love, and they come in there and they take pictures of it. And if you asked them why, they'd be hard pressed to say why they love it. But then if you look around and you see the great vaulted ceilings and the color ceilings and the ornamentation, which is all organic and very much, even though you can't find any of those shapes and forms actually in nature, they're all look like organic shapes and forms in the fixtures and the grill work where you pick up your tickets and the materials that are used. I mean, the great shafts of natural light coming in. It's really about a space that's very much about nature, even though you're right in the inner core of a big building.
It's like a cathedral. Yeah,
exactly. Much of our sacred architecture, many of our great cathedrals are really about, connecting us to the world beyond ourselves, to nature. And you look at the shapes and forms and materials and those great cathedrals, and after a while, and you look at them closely and you realize, oh my God, it's all about nature. There's just, there's 50 things there that you can start to point to that are, that are mimicking or simulating the experience of nature in the indoor environment.
Professor Kellert, we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes. Your new book is called Birthright of a True Humanity.
The Birthright of a True Humanity.
I'm sorry?
The Birthright of a True Humanity.
I thought that's what I said. No mind.
You left out the but which is being very picky. But anyway.
No. You know what? I'm not hearing correctly. Say it again. What's the title?
The Birthright.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I did leave that out. Wonderful. I did leave that out. The Birthright of a True Humanity. Well, you know what I'm driving at. I'd like you to talk to us, if you will, about how you see our true humanity.
Well, the point is that our true humanity depends upon our relationship, again, to the world beyond ourselves, to nature, and physically, emotionally, and spiritually. We cannot realize our full potential. We cannot realize our fullness of self, either as individuals or as a species, without a profound sense of relationship and connection to the world in which we inhabit, which includes the non-human world as much as the human world. And like much of what makes us human, it's something that we have to earn. It's not just we have the free will that many other species do not have, in that we are not mindless. I want to say victims. That's probably not a very good word, but mindless victims, I'll say, of our biology. We don't just respond to an invariant instinct. We have this creative free will capacity, but it's a two-edged sword, and it's we can both use it to in a way that builds on our biology and fulfills ourselves, achieves that birthright of a true humanity, or we can, turn away from it in a kind of self-defeating. Our capacity for creativity is only matched by our capacity for self-destructiveness, and so we have to earn that birthright. And let me give you the quote I took it from, which is a wonderful quote from a fellow named Henry Beston, who wrote this great book called The Outermost House. And he said, "Nature is a part of our humanity, and without some awareness and experience of that divine mystery, man ceases to be man. When the Pleiades, which is a constellation, and the wind and the grass are no longer a part of the human spirit, a part of very flesh and bone, man becomes, as it were, a cosmic outlaw, having neither the completeness and integrity of the animal, that's our biology, or the birthright of a true humanity." And so that's where that term came from. I felt like it said it, and it said it all. And so, the reason why the subtitle is, People, Nature, and the Modern World, it's that's the challenge. How do we achieve the birthright of that true humanity in a modern world in which, we're ever more separated from nature? And we can do it, but as I suggest at the outside, it's an enormously challenging and complex task to make that occur but we have to, because if we fail at it, we will do so at our peril.
Well, it's just magnificent. We are outlaw, and we want terribly to come home, and be cleansed. And that's what these months and years are all about for all of us. It's been a great pleasure visiting with you, very much so, and thank you very, very much for coming to the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care.
You too.
Okay. Dr. Stephen R. Kellert, Kellert, Professor Emeritus at Yale, and more, great writer. And thank you very much. We're done for today. KOWS 107.3 FM, Occidental, California. The What Now Show, Mondays, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. The website is pantedmonkey.org. And these things are archived there, and it's a house of treasure. We've had a remarkable plenitude of magnificent women and men coming to talk to us, and it's there on the website. It's a great education, a great nourishment. Next week we're going to have Jay Griffiths, Bob Kohler, and Dina Metzger. Wonderful people, all of them. Very, very excited about next week's show. And to tell you the truth, the whole calendar for November and December and January is filling up nicely. The show has got its feet under it and has a certain amount of stature, if you don't mind me saying so. And we're attracting just marvelous, marvelous people to come. And we have the luxury of almost an hour to offer them to present their life's work, which is where their hearts are, and it's all to our benefit. The show could use some help and support in different ways, and we encourage that, because we have a good thing going here, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback from a lot of people.